today we will discuss about or start at the approximate methods section of this course. So, as we discussed before, this course can be divided into two main broad parts. One is the formalism and another is applications or methods in solving problems. These are interdependent parts, and with this lecture we are starting the second part, which is application or solving problems or like techniques for solving problem. And the first topic in this module is time independent perturbation theory. So, we will start the topic by doing a simple mathematical exercise, and the exercise is estimating the function f x equal to e to the power minus x divided by 1 by x at lowest non-trivial order in x, and use that form to calculate the value of the function at a small value of x, let us say x equal to 0.01. So, at this point I will suggest you to pause the video and do it yourself, like expand the series, do a series expansion of e to the power minus s and 1 by x. You combine that and write down a series expansion of the function f x, plug in the value of x equal to 0.01 in that your expansion, calculate the result and compare it with the actual value of f x, which you can compute by simply plugging in the number x equal to 0.01 into the exact form of the function, and then see how good is your estimate. So, here is the solution. Some of you will probably do it in this way. In fact, most of you I think will do it in this way unless something else is specially specified, and that is you write down the function f x e to the power minus x 1 minus x, expand e to the power minus x simply as the Taylor expansion, expand 1 by 1 minus x as the Taylor expansion in the line 3, and since we are interested in the lowest non-trivial order in x, which is a valid thing to do when x is much smaller than 1, we will write the e to the power minus x as 1 minus x, we will write 1 by 1 minus x as 1 plus x and combine them together to get the function to be estimated at the lowest order is 1 minus x square. Now, plug in the number x not equal to 0.01 in the original formula without any approximation, you will get the value of the function to be 1.0000503, and our estimate in our expansion, if we plug in the number, we will get 0.9999. Now, this is a fairly good approximation, it is accurate up to third place of decimal, but it fails to capture some crucial feature of the function. For example, this function is a growing function from x equal to 0 to 1, and that means the value of the function at x equal to 0.01 is greater than f x or x equal to 0. But this function estimates it to be opposite, like it shows it is a decreasing function. So, it is missing a detailed and crucial aspect of the feature of the function, and we will try to understand why is so, like what are we missing, or can we do it better by without actually, of course we can do better if I go to like take many orders of x, but without going to many order x, are we missing something? Okay, so now let us do the problem again, but this time keeping a careful track of exactly how much we have thrown away while we are doing this approximate expansion. So, for that I will introduce a notation called O notation or the big O notation, which is basically implies that you are tracking carefully the terms you are keeping and terms you are throwing out. So, let us look at the expansion of e to the power minus x, that is 1 minus x plus half x square minus 1 6 x cube and so on the terms which are higher order, or in for x equal to small these are terms which are smaller in magnitude, or so now let us write down the function up to terms order x cube. Why I am particularly doing order x cube, it will be clear in a moment. So, now if I keep the terms, it will be 1 minus x plus half x square plus order x cube, which is basically the terms which are magnitude x cube or smaller. We do the same for 1 by 1 minus x, and now we plug in the forms for fx. You will discover that you will get a much more complicated formula if you want to carefully get rid of all terms which are order x cube. For example, you will get terms like, in that expansion there are 4 types. Basically, if I just break it down into 4 terms of the later 1 by 1 minus x expansion, you will see there will be terms like x square x, and then x cube, order x cube times x. All these terms are actually smaller than order x cube, so these should be carefully kept. If I want to do a expansion of the combined function fx, I should carefully keep track of them and remove them or put them under the notation order x cube. So when I do that carefully, you can convince yourself just by looking into the algebra, you will get the functional form of the expansion to be 1 plus half x square plus order x cube terms, which is very different from what we had earlier when we did an uncontrolled approximation. Now you plug in the formula, you will see not only the number or the estimation is better, it is now 5th place in decimal, accurate up to 5th place in decimal. It also captures that increasing function aspect of this function fx. So the lesson to be learned here, that when you do a approximation or expansion of a function around some small values of its argument, it is important to keep track or do a proper bookkeeping of all the terms which are coming in, or all the terms you are throwing out, and unless you do that, you will start missing important detailed features of the function. And this is a thing which we will do again and again over these applications of quantum mechanics in perturbation theory. Basically, we will learn to keep a careful track of what terms we are keeping, what term we are not, and also you need a of course now we are doing physics problem, we will to have a physical explanation that why are you doing that and what does it mean actually to not keep that term in the calculation. So let us just quickly revise what we have learned in this small exercise. The O notation will allow us to make the controlled approximation, and the other approximation where we do not keep careful track of what terms we are keeping, what terms we are throwing away. In that case, there is, like, we have something called, we write it as dot notation. Sometimes people are not very careful in the books or text, they use the one notation for the other, but you get the idea that what does it mean to do a controlled approximation and an uncontrolled approximation. Okay. Now also we learned that if the controlled approximation is done right, it's pretty good, like comes so close, and we will see that examples of that over and over again. When it is done right, quantum mechanics can predict experimental results up to 16 places after decimal. Like, it is the most accurately tested theory in that sense of all the theory humankind have came up with till date of the nature, about the nature. So we will see such approximation, that how it is so accurate and how this perturbation theory, even though an approximation, can be so good to the actual result. Okay. So now we will come to applications in quantum mechanics, or look at how this idea works in solving a quantum mechanical problem. To see that, first recognize that solvable problem in quantum mechanics almost does not exist. They always involve special symmetries and all that, and for any problem we will, but luckily there are many problems which might have a solvable part, which can be separated simply into a solvable part and an unsolvable part. By solvable I mean you can exactly solve it and get a closed analytical expression which is the solution, such as harmonic oscillator or hydrogen atom problem, as you have done it in the quantum mechanics 1 course. So let us assume that we know there is a solvable problem for which we know very exactly in the nice functional analytical form the eigenvalues are eigenvectors of the Hamiltonian H naught, which are given by, the eigenvectors are given by n naught and the eigenvalues are given by en naught, and the eigenvectors satisfy the orthogonality, orthonormal condition. Now, can we use this knowledge of H naught to solve a problem which has a part H 1 for which we do not know the solution? So, we assume that the problem we are interested in, for which we can write down the Hamiltonian as a summation of a H naught and H 1, but the full solution of H naught we know, the H 1 we do not know, and we want to estimate, or we want to see how well we can solve this full problem. So, the simplest case is when H 1 and H naught commute. In that case, you know, if you have solved H naught, you also have solved H 1, because they have the simultaneous eigenvectors. And then obviously the perturbed energies, if you take the equation of H and apply the bra on the other side, you will get, it will be EI equal to EI naught plus NI naught H 1 NI naught, the matrix elements of H 1 in this eigenbasis, which is trivial because it is also the eigenbasis of H 1. But in most problems that will not be the case, and that is where you have to come up with some clever technique, which is what we will learn. So, in order to do that, it is often useful to introduce an unit free continuous real parameter epsilon, which varies between 0 and 1, such that you write the H naught as H naught plus epsilon H 1. Remember that the epsilon does not exist anywhere in the problem. You are just splitting the problem into two halves, and you are like putting a knob in front of the problem which you cannot solve, and the knob can be dialed to 0, then you have exactly, then H epsilon becomes H naught, which is the problem you can exactly solve, and then you can dial the knob to epsilon equal to 1 to reach to the actual problem. And why are you doing that? So, it basically allows us to consider a family of Hamiltonian that interpolate from H naught to H, to full H, and it turns out to be an useful thing to do, because we can use certain features or certain mathematical techniques to solve this problem when you have such a parameter in the problem. Okay. So, now you understand the role of the parameter epsilon, and then we will see that whether we can do an approximation or an expansion on this. For that, so here I repeat the point which I just mentioned, that epsilon equal to 1 is the Hamiltonian of interest, but epsilon is the dial which allows us to consider this family of Hamiltonians, and that makes sense experimentally in many practical system, because in many practical system you can turn on the perturbation, switch it on and off. For example, simply you will do an example of Stark effect, which is basically, or Zeeman effect, which will turning on a magnetic field externally, and you can increase the magnetic field and reduce the magnetic field. The only criteria we will see that the perturbation needs to be small, it needs to be a small, but what is small and how small is small enough, we will estimate that in a moment. And you will see that even a ridiculously high magnetic field in the laboratory, or any magnetic field possible you can consider in the laboratory, practically consider, can actually fall in the category of small, and that is why these kind of techniques of expansion are so successful in predicting. But coming back to the point which we are talking about, this parameter epsilon acts like a bookkeeping device in organizing the perturbation analysis. So, we will see how. Now, normally you will see that, you will think that a small means that the epsilon H1 part is smaller than H naught simply, then you can say you will say, oh, it is a small perturbation, and you will see that is not a very accurate way of saying that. We will see what is the accurate way of saying that the perturbation is a small perturbation, such that we can do an expansion. So, let us see let us ask the question, when does such a scheme work? When does such a scheme work means, if I have a problem of this form, you are allowed to you are allowed to write down a problem which you want to solve in this form, that where you have a part H naught and a part H1, and then you are introducing an extra parameter epsilon to solve the problem, and at the end of course you have to bring the original problem you want to solve is this problem, is the problem where H naught is equal to H naught plus H1. So, after you used your technique and solved the problem, you want to put back the epsilon to 1, which is what was the original case. So, when does such a scheme work? We will see that. So, it turns out this perturbation theory works on the assumption that the eigenvalues and eigenvectors of H epsilon can be obtained by expanding them as a series in the power of epsilon, which is a parameter which we introduced for our convenience, and we will immediately see in few minutes that how useful it is. Now, in order for this to be true, mathematically it means that the energy eigenvalues or eigenvector epsilon H epsilon are analytic or well behaved near epsilon equal to 0, because epsilon is a parameter, is a small parameter in the theory to control, because why we need the epsilon, it is just like the exercise we did, it is like a control parameter which will keep track of smallness of the perturbation. But in order that to work, such a series expansion to work, it has to be analytic or well behaved near epsilon equal to 0. A second important thing is that it is a practical aspect. In order to obtain meaningful result, we have to be able to estimate the properties of H, the full Hamiltonian, in terms of a very few terms of the expansion, or such that if we have to do like 10 terms or 20 terms of the expansion, it becomes a ridiculously hard problem, and probably it is as hard as solving the original problem, like which we cannot solve, and that is why we are doing this kind of approximate techniques. Now, in order for that to be true, the epsilon H1 has to be a small perturbation. So, what does it exactly mean, like when I say something is a small perturbation, and how small is small enough? We will see the exact meaning of these words in a moment. So, let us look at, so I will give an idea about the smallness argument or when does it work argument in terms of pictorially here, and we will see the same thing mathematically as we proceed in this topic of the lecture. So, let us say in this picture I am plotting the, I have a little goof up here in terms of notation, because my small parameter I refer it to as, I am supposed to refer it as epsilon, but here I referred it as lambda. So, let us say, so just read in your mind that lambda is equal to epsilon. Okay. So, now let us say I have a spectrum of my Hamiltonian or the problem which is E lambda, and that E lambda is nothing but E naught lambda or E naught epsilon, and it has some energy levels 1, 2, 3, 4 which are non-degenerate, which means for each energy there is only one state. And let us say now I crank up or dial the knob of epsilon, which is lambda here, and as I said that I get that epsilon can be from 0 to 1. So, I dial it from 0 to, I increase it to 1, and when I do that the levels will go through some changes. Let us say the changes are like that, and when epsilon or lambda is equal to 1, I see these levels as 1, 2, 3, 4 on the right side. Now, it turns out, and you will show this mathematically, there is a theorem called no level crossing theorem, which means a pair of energy levels which are connected by this perturbation, they should not cross as the strength of perturbation is varied, which means the labels, even though the states or the energy levels of the states are varying, it can be completely different from the original problem, the labels should remain the same, which means as we crank up the lambda or the epsilon, 1 should go to 1, 2 should go to 2, 3 should go to 3, 4 should go to 4. It should not happen that the 1 and 2 cross each other. at least in the part which we are, when we are doing, if we are doing a perturbation expansion or perturbation theory to estimate the energy and eigenvector of 1 and 2, these 1 and 2 should not cross, which means after we do we crank on the full lambda, which is of course what we have to do if we want to solve, because at the end we want to plug back lambda equal to 1. The 2 should not go to 1 and 1 should not go to 2. If that happens, then your perturbation breaks down. And we will see, and there are many problems where that happens, and these are like extremely challenging research problems. So that is a requirement, and we will see why that is a requirement. Okay. Now we'll see the same thing, we'll repeat the same thing for a degenerate system. Now it turns out for degenerate system things are little different and more complicated, which we will learn in the next topic as a next topic in the course. So let us say I have a 4 energy levels 1, 2, 3, 4 and they are degenerate, and the dots represents the degeneracy. The first one is singly degenerate, second one is doubly degenerate, third one is triply degenerate, fourth one is again doubly degenerate, which means there are 4 states at same energy, 3 states at same energy of level 3, 2 states of same energy at level 2, 2 states same energy at level 4 and 1 state of same energy at level 1. Now again if I crank up the lambda, go from 0 to 1 or epsilon to be more accurate, 1 should remain at 1, 2 will, it can happen that, and most likely in most cases it happens that the perturbation generally splits the level up in the first order in epsilon, like the degeneracy goes away, because sometimes it, as we know that the degeneracy comes because of some special symmetry, right, some symmetry and some preservation gives you degeneracy. So H naught, let us say, had some nice symmetry which leads to this degeneracy, but when you added a perturbation H1, there is no reason that that symmetry should be present. It can be present, in that case the degeneracy will stay, but it most likely it is a, if it is some arbitrary H1, some complicated H1, that symmetry will be gone and that degeneracy will be gone also. So the 2 levels will split for the, which are corresponding to the level 2, they will split. Similarly the 3 levels to correspond to level 3 will split, for 4 the levels will split. And if the criteria which we just mentioned, which is to give you a physical feel, that the criteria tells you they should not mix. Mix means or they should not cross, like the level of 3, the lower level of 3 and the upper level of 2, after the lambda is 1 or crank to 1, they should not be crossing each other, or there is no level crossing. If that happens, then perturbation theory breaks down, and there is a very fine example of Fermi liquid theory and non-Fermi liquid theory. These are 2 hallmark of successful, one most successful theory in condensed matter is Fermi liquid theory, explains all the metals. It turns out in many materials such as insulators, this kind of level crossing happens, and then you can no longer apply the perturbation theory, and those things are called non-Fermi liquids. They are very hot and debated topics of research, because there is no easy way to calculate properties, their properties. Like perturbation theory is one of the most successful theories of quantum mechanics, and after that there is sometimes, in some cases you do not have a uniform framework to attack all the problems where this perturbation theory breaks down. So you either look for a clever way to write down the Hamiltonian where you have a small parameter where this does not happen, and then you try to do perturbation theory in that clever way of writing that Hamiltonian, where you identified a special type of small parameters. Sometimes that approach works, sometimes none of this approach work, and you need a completely fresh different theory for that kind of system, strongly correlated system. For example, QED is a, or quantum electrodynamics is a perturbative theory, and that's why, and that is because of the way nature is, that the perturbation term can be treated as a small term, and there is a small parameter in which you can write called the fine structure constant, and it is remarkably accurate in predicting or properties, like quantum mechanics is remarkably accurate. On the other hand, QCD, the strong interaction theory, I mean QCD has a perturbative part in certain energy scales, because the parameters epsilon for QCD is energy dependent. For at certain energies, usually at low energy, QCD is perturbative, and if it is perturbative, then again you can predict many things, but at higher energy it is not perturbative, and then hell breaks down, and then you have to try very hard techniques and very different and ongoing research topics are there to attack how to solve that kind of problem. So, that is just a backstory of how good perturbation theory or how accurate perturbation theory is. Okay. Now, I will end this module with a small example which is from Sakurai, and I want you to solve this problem in detail from Sakurai. It is there, it is referred as the two-state problem. It is a two-level system where you can solve this using perturbation theory and see the criteria of how small is small enough. So, the problem is given by, there is a H naught which is E1 0 0 0 E2 0, a diagonal form already solved, trivially solved, you know how to solve it. Then you add a perturbation which is off diagonal. So, in order to keep the whole problem Hermitian, the whole H Hermitian, this has to be the form 0 V V star 0. So, you check that. So, I will suggest you to study Sakurai for understanding this problem in great detail. I am there just give you an overview. So, the whole problem is H epsilon, you can write, if you introduce this parameter epsilon, if is H E1 0 epsilon B star E2 0. If you diagonalize this simply, it comes to the form of E plus minus epsilon. There are two levels, it is a two level problem. It is given by E1 naught plus E2 naught by 2 plus minus square root E1 naught minus E2 naught square by 4 plus epsilon square B square. You can arrange things a little bit here and there, and to bring it in the form of 1 by z square root, 1 by z square root, and you know how the expansion of 1 by z square root works. And let us say you keep terms up to a certain level, let us say order z to the power 4, and you can show very simply that the convergence criteria of this problem is that epsilon V must be half E1 naught minus E2 naught, which means the energy of the perturbation or the strength of the perturbation V with the epsilon factor in front of it must be less than the energy, half the energy gap between the two levels. What happens if you do not respect this? Then this series is not converging, then this expansion is not valid. You cannot even apply this idea. And what does it mean pictorially? Try to make sense of this picture now. It means your perturbation should be weak enough such that when you crank on or turn on the epsilon, the two levels or the E1 and E2 does not mix. So, think about this problem, and that is where I will end this module, and we will now pick up the formal way of solving this problem or using in a generic n level system. So, what is here to be understood, that it is not sufficient that the H epsilon, which is H naught plus epsilon H1, the epsilon, it is not sufficient to say that the epsilon H1 is just smaller than H naught. That is not the right way to say that when this perturbation is valid, even though that is what it naively appears to be. It tells you a much more precise statement about which comes in terms of the strength of the perturbation or strength of the potential which you cannot solve with respect to the energy levels of the original problem or the problem which you can solve, the E1 naught minus E2 naught. And that is basically a crude version of the no level crossing theorem. So, think about this before we go to more complicated examples. So, here is the statement: for convergence the perturbation must be small compared to the energy difference in H naught, and it is not sufficient that the magnitude of the matrix elements epsilon H1 is small compared to that in H naught. So, the energy difference comes into picture. Of course, you can estimate that this result will have expected complication when the energy difference go to 0, or in other words there is degeneracy, and that is a completely different thing which we will like to tackle in the third part or third lecture maybe. Okay. With that, I will move on to the next topic, and I will stop this video or this segment of the video here, and I will ask you to slow down and digest this topic from the read from Sakurai before we go on to the formal perturbation expansion. Okay, that's all.